Mommy, look at that. My son's trembling finger pointed at the floor. Following his gaze, I spotted an old wooden door peeking out from under the edge of the carpet. The entrance to the basement. From the half-open gap came damp air and an indescribable foul smell. My heart began to pound. Approaching the door nervously, the moment I opened it completely with trembling hands, I gasped. There lay my mother-in-law, utterly weakened. But this story must begin 3 months ago. From those happy days. 8 months after marrying David, I was 5 months pregnant and at the height of happiness. Marriage to David was my second, and Lucas, my son from my previous husband, had completely taken to David, his new daddy. The time we spent laughing together at the breakfast table was a treasure beyond compare. David was a kind man. For me, working from home as a graphic designer, he would always massage my shoulders when he came home from work. He would take Lucas to the park. Shopping together for baby supplies was truly enjoyable. There was just one thing that bothered me. I had never once met David's mother, Margaret. Before we married, David explained to me that her dementia had progressed and she was in a facility. He said that seeing me would confuse her, so he was refraining from visits for now. I respected my husband's judgment. I understood that for dementia patients, sudden environmental changes and meeting new people could cause stress. So I didn't insist on meeting her. But a sense of unease gradually crept into my heart. David began going out at night twice a week. He said it was for emergency work situations. Since he worked in IT, I figured he might be called out for system troubles. But leaving the house at 2 a.m. and returning around 4 in the morning, when that continued, naturally questions arose. Then a decisive incident occurred. When I was organizing things before maternity leave, I checked my savings account. The balance that should have been $45,000 was nearly zero. My hands trembled. I wanted to believe it was some mistake. But when I looked at the transaction history, withdrawals had been made repeatedly under David's name. That night, I gathered my courage and asked my husband. David answered without the slightest sign of distress. He'd used it for investments. He'd increase it and pay it back soon, so don't worry. Seeing his calm smile, I couldn't say anything more. I wanted to trust my husband. We had 2 children together, one in my belly. I wanted to protect this family. But deep in my heart, I sensed something was wrong. One day, David's cell phone was left on the living room table, still connected to the charger. He was in the shower. To my own surprise, I picked up that phone quite naturally. I didn't intend to look at messages. I just wanted to know the name of his mother's facility. When I opened his contacts, the entry for his mother's name, Margaret Thompson, had only an address instead of a phone number. Not a facility address, but his family home address. In the notes section was written December 15th, birthday. A small light kindled in my heart. It was almost my mother-in-law's birthday. The facility might prohibit visits, but maybe I could go to the family home to get some keepsakes. Couldn't I do something as a surprise for David? From that day on, I began secretly making plans. I lied to David, saying I was going to lunch with a friend. I felt guilty, but I was driven by the desire to please my husband. I decided to visit my mother-in-law's family home with Lucas. On the afternoon of December 14th, we drove to that address. It was a quiet residential area in the suburbs. Proceeding down a street lined with old houses, the destination house came into view. But what I saw there betrayed my expectations. The house was run down. The lawn in the yard was overgrown, and spider webs stretched across the front door. Mail was overflowing from the mailbox. I got out of the car and nervously peeked into the mailbox. 3 months' worth of mail was stuffed inside. If she'd gone into a facility, what about the house maintenance? David hadn't said anything about it. My heart began to race. Lucas gripped my hand. "Mommy, I'm scared," he said in a small voice. Holding Lucas close, I began walking toward the entrance. Something was decidedly wrong. That premonition enveloped my entire body. As I stood before the entrance, an elderly woman from the neighboring house approached with a surprised expression. The white-haired woman in an apron stopped when she saw us. "Who are you? No one has lived in this house for months now." At those words, I felt like I couldn't breathe. But I answered as calmly as possible. "I'm Emma. I'm the wife of Margaret's son, David. Her daughter-in-law." The elderly woman's expression clouded for a moment. She looked me over as if appraising me, then slowly opened her mouth. "Margaret went into a facility, I was told by her son. But..." She trailed off. I involuntarily stepped forward. "But what? Do you know something?" The elderly woman sighed deeply. "I'm Chen. Margaret and I have been close friends for 30 years. We used to have tea together every day. She was a dear friend of mine." There was deep sadness in Mrs. Chen's eyes. She continued. "It was 3 months ago. One day suddenly, her son appeared and told me Margaret's dementia had progressed and she'd gone into a facility. It was so sudden, I was shocked. Just the day before, Margaret had been fine. We'd been solving crossword puzzles together. She did have some memory lapses, but I didn't think it was that serious." Mrs. Chen's voice was trembling. I asked for the facility's name, but her son wouldn't tell me. Not the location either. He said to refrain from visiting. But we're friends of 30 years. I at least wanted to know where she was. I tried to call, but Margaret's phone didn't connect. It had been cancelled. My heart began pounding violently. This was no coincidence. Something was decidedly wrong. "Mrs. Chen, did you notice anything else?" Mrs. Chen thought for a moment, then answered hesitantly. "I've seen lights in this house at night. Several times. At first I thought it was a burglar, but there was a black car parked there. But I didn't think it was enough to call the police. And I thought maybe her son was coming to check on things from time to time." At that moment, Lucas tugged at my clothes. "Mommy, I hear someone's voice." I looked down at Lucas involuntarily. "What are you saying, Lucas? Isn't it just the wind?" But Lucas shook his head. His face was pale, and his small body was trembling. "No, Mommy. Someone's saying, 'Help me.'" Mrs. Chen also looked startled. "Come to think of it, I've heard sounds at night. At first I thought it was animals, but now that I think about it..." I looked around the house. All the windows were closed. But I felt like I really could hear sounds from somewhere. No, maybe it was just my imagination. Maybe I was just being influenced by Lucas's words. But what if it was true? What if? I refused to think about it. Such a thing couldn't be possible. David was a kind husband. Putting his mother in a facility must have been for her own good. The house being run down was just poor maintenance. But my savings. The nighttime outings. I had to go inside. I had to find out for sure. "Mrs. Chen, do you have a key?" Mrs. Chen shook her head. Margaret had given me a spare key, but when her son came, he asked for it back. "For security," he said. I tried the front doorknob. Naturally, it was locked. All the windows appeared to be locked too. Lucas tugged at my clothes again. Tears were welling up in his eyes. "Mommy, I feel like Grandma's calling. We have to help her." Grandma. Lucas called the mother-in-law he'd never met that. A child's intuition sometimes surpasses adult reasoning. Mrs. Chen said in a small voice, "There's a broken window in the back. It's been cracked since a stormy night 3 months ago." I was thinking of telling her son, but I didn't have his contact information. I made my decision. Maybe I should call the police. But what if there was nothing? What if this was all my overthinking, and I just illegally entered an empty house? My relationship with my husband would be over. What about the baby in my belly? But Lucas's trembling voice, Mrs. Chen's anxious expression, and above all, the alarm bells ringing deep in my own heart drove me forward. Could you show me to the back door? Mrs. Chen hesitated for a moment, but then nodded firmly. I'll come with you. Margaret is my dear friend. If she's in trouble, I have to help. The three of us went around to the back of the house. Sure enough, a small window was broken. Glass shards were scattered on the ground. The window was small, but thin as I was, I might be able to get in. Lucas, wait here. Mrs. Chen, would you watch my son? But Lucas gripped my hand tightly. Mommy, I'm coming too. I'm scared, but I want to help Grandma. I looked into my son's face. I was amazed that such a strong will dwelled in his small body. All right. But you must stay by my side. Promise me. Lucas nodded with a serious face. I carefully reached through the broken window and opened the lock inside. When I pushed up the window frame, the old wood made a creaking sound. The smell of dust and something else indescribable flowed out. Taking a deep breath, I entered the house through the window. Lucas followed. Mrs. Chen said she would keep watch outside. If anything happened, she'd call the police immediately. Inside the house was dim, with all the curtains closed. I turned on my smartphone's light. Dust swirled up and danced in the light. When I stepped into the kitchen, I noticed something strange. While the entire house was covered in dust, the kitchen was different. There were signs the sink had been used recently. When I opened the refrigerator, there were bottles of water, bread, and several cans inside. The expiration dates hadn't passed yet. Looking in the trash can, I saw empty water bottles and a large amount of convenience food packaging had been discarded. Someone was living here. No, being made to live here. At that moment, Lucas said in a trembling voice, "Mommy, look at that." His small finger pointed at the living room floor. The edge of the carpet was unnaturally curled up. I slowly pulled back the carpet. There was an old wooden door. The entrance to the basement. The door had a padlock on the outside. My hands began to tremble. What did this mean? Staring at the padlock, I understood. Someone was locked in here. I had to break the padlock. That was all I could think about. But how? I couldn't do it with my bare hands. I needed some kind of tool. Lucas was trembling beside me. The guilt of involving him tightened my chest. But I couldn't turn back. If there really was someone beyond this door. I rushed to the window and called out to Mrs. Chen. "Mrs. Chen, do you have a toolbox or something that could break metal?" Mrs. Chen saw my desperate expression and understood immediately. She returned home once, and came back minutes later carrying an old toolbox. I received the toolbox through the window and took out a hammer. With the heavy hammer in hand, I returned to the basement door. I aimed at the padlock and swung down with all my strength. The dull sound of metal hitting metal echoed throughout the house. It didn't break on the first try. I struck it twice, 3 times. I could see Lucas covering his ears. On the 4th impact, the padlock broke. Fragments rolled across the floor. I took a deep breath. Before opening the door, I had to prepare myself mentally. But what kind of preparation could I make? What was beyond this door, did I really want to know? But there was no turning back now. When I put my hand on the door handle, my hand was trembling violently. Slowly opening the door, damp air and an unbearable stench poured out all at once. I involuntarily turned my face away. Lucas let out a small scream. Stairs continued into the darkness. When I pointed my smartphone light, I could see old wooden stairs. I descended step by step carefully. Lucas was gripping my clothes tightly. The basement was smaller than I'd imagined, with a low ceiling. Mold was growing on the walls from the moisture. And in the corner of the room, I lost my voice. There lay something shaped like a person, wrapped in a dirty blanket, barely moving. At first, I couldn't even tell if it was alive. I approached on trembling legs. When I shone the light, it was definitely a human being. A woman. A body that was nothing but skin and bones. Matted white hair. Dirty clothes that hadn't been changed for days, no, weeks. Was this Margaret? In the corner of the room was a bucket being used as a makeshift toilet. Empty water bottles were scattered across the floor. I could see empty cans from opened canned food. This person had been living here. No, being kept alive here. I knelt and approached the woman. Looking at her face, her eyes were closed, but her chest was rising and falling faintly. She was alive. Still alive. Margaret. Can you hear me? I'm Emma. David's wife. The moment she heard that name, the woman's eyes slowly opened. Unfocused pupils looked at me. And tears overflowed from those eyes. Help me. Please. The voice was hoarse, almost inaudible. But she definitely said that. David. My son locked me in. 3 months. 3 months here. My entire body froze. This was a nightmare. This couldn't be real. My husband. Kind David. The father of the baby in my belly. Margaret gripped my arm with trembling hands. They were surprisingly cold and powerless. He said I was going into a facility. But where he brought me was here. The basement. He locked me in. I screamed, but no one heard. Each of her words pierced my heart. He comes twice a week, in the middle of the night. Leaves food and water. But he doesn't speak. Even when I cry, even when I beg. Nothing. Twice a week. In the middle of the night. It matched David's outings. I stood up and took out my smartphone with trembling hands. First, an ambulance. I had to get this person to a hospital. Then the police. But before I could make the call, Mrs. Chen came down the stairs. The moment she saw Margaret, she cried out. Margaret! Oh, Margaret! Mrs. Chen rushed to her friend's side and embraced that emaciated body. Both were crying. 30 years of friendship. To think they would be reunited in such a way. I called 911. I gave the address and explained the situation. An elderly woman had been confined. Send an ambulance and police immediately. After hanging up, Margaret began to speak again. David is trying to sell the house. My house. There were papers. But I didn't sign them. He forged them. With trembling fingers, she pointed to the corner of the basement. There was a cardboard box. I opened the box. Inside were documents. A real estate sale contract. Margaret Thompson's signature was there. But the handwriting was unnaturally shaky. Clearly forged. There were other documents too. A pension direct deposit change form. Margaret's pension had been set up to be deposited into David's account. Starting 3 months ago. Everything connected. My savings disappearing. The nighttime outings. Not telling me the facility's name. Not letting me meet his mother. David had confined his mother and was stealing her assets. And me too. Hadn't I also been a target? Me, pregnant. Me, unable to divorce. Me, easy to manipulate. Lucas gripped my hand. Mommy, is Grandma okay? I hugged my son. It's okay, Lucas. It's okay now. Help is coming. But was it really okay? My life had just completely collapsed. I could hear sirens in the distance. The ambulance and police were approaching. Mrs. Chen continued to hold Margaret's hand, speaking to her gently. It's okay now, Margaret. You're safe now. We'll help you. Margaret nodded weakly. But deep fear remained in her eyes. David will come back. If he finds out. I said in a strong voice, it's all right. He can't get near you anymore. I guarantee it. But inside, fear was swirling. My husband, the man I loved, had been doing such terrible things. Had he intended to do the same to me? After the baby in my belly was born. After he'd stolen all my assets. The sirens grew louder. I heard them stop in front of the house. Footsteps approaching. Help had arrived. But my life would never go back to what it was. From the top of the stairs, I heard a paramedic's voice. Is anyone there? We're here. In the basement. I shouted. Holding Lucas, I climbed the stairs. When I came out into the light, I cried for the first time. I just watched in a daze as the paramedics carried Margaret out of the basement. She was placed on a stretcher and given an oxygen mask. Her emaciated body looked as small as a child's. Mrs. Chen said she would ride in the ambulance. She'd go with her to the hospital. I expressed my gratitude. Without this woman, we never would have found Margaret. After the ambulance drove away, I faced the police officer. He introduced himself as Detective Rodriguez, a calm man in his mid-40s. He said he was a detective specializing in elder abuse. Please tell me everything in detail. I told him everything. My marriage to David. Never having met his mother. The missing savings. The nighttime outings. And the circumstances that brought me here today. Detective Rodriguez took notes carefully as he listened. When I finished speaking, he said with a serious expression, "There's a high probability your husband is involved. This is a serious crime. Elder abuse, confinement, fraud. Depending on the circumstances, attempted murder might also apply." Attempted murder. At those words, my body trembled. If we'd been just a few days later, Margaret might have died. And David might have wanted that. The detective began searching the basement. There might be other evidence besides the documents I'd found. I sat on the living room sofa, holding Lucas. My son was exhausted and beginning to fall asleep in my lap. Hours later, Detective Rodriguez returned saying he'd made an important discovery. We found the key to the padlock in the basement. And the keychain attached to this key. What he showed me was a familiar keychain. The same one David used. The same design as the one on his car keys. We also took fingerprints. Your husband's fingerprints should be all over the basement. And we've also checked the security camera footage provided by the neighbor. Security camera. Mrs. Chen's house had a camera. The footage shows a man entering and leaving this house at night. We can also confirm the car's license plate number. Let me verify if it matches your husband's car. I told him David's car's license number. Detective Rodriguez contacted someone over the radio, then nodded. It matches. All the evidence was coming together. Inescapable facts were piling up before me. But Detective Rodriguez's next words far exceeded my imagination. Mrs. Thompson, there's something I need to confirm. Does your husband David Thompson have any previous marriages? I shook my head. No, I was told it was his first marriage. The detective's expression became grave. Actually, when we searched the database, we found 2 previous marriage records under the name David Thompson. And in both cases, the former wives' mothers disappeared. My heart almost stopped. The first mother-in-law disappeared 5 years ago. Her body was never found. The family was told she'd gone into a facility, but there's no record at any facility. The second mother-in-law disappeared 3 years ago. Same situation. And in both cases, David Thompson inherited the mother-in-law's assets, their houses, their savings. I was speechless. This was no coincidence. This was a calculated crime. So I was. There's a high probability you were the third target. Detective Rodriguez's words pierced my entire body. David had intended to use me from the start. The marriage, the kindness, it was all an act. Even the baby in my belly might have been just a tool to keep me from escaping. The detective continued. We're reopening the investigation into those 2 previous cases. And one more thing. When we examined your husband's phone records, we found he'd been in frequent contact with a certain woman. Her name is Jennifer Miller. She's registered as a real estate agent. A real estate agent. Forged documents. Everything connected. She's a possible accomplice. She may have helped create the forged documents. We've already arranged to take her into custody. I took a deep breath. Everything was becoming clear. David's lies were being exposed one by one. At that moment, my cell phone rang. It was David. With trembling hands, I answered the phone. Emma, where are you? I was worried. His voice was as gentle as always. As if he knew nothing. How many times had I been deceived by this voice? Work. I'll be home soon. I pretended to be as calm as possible. Detective Rodriguez nodded. Come home quickly. I'm making dinner and waiting for you. When I hung up, the detective said, We'll arrest your husband at your home. Mrs. Thompson, please stay somewhere safe with your child. But I shook my head. No. I'm going too. I want to see his face. I want to see the moment he's arrested with my own eyes. The detective hesitated a bit but then nodded. All right. But wait in the car. As dusk began to fall, we arrived at our home. I could see David's car parked in the parking lot. He was already home. Not knowing anything, probably preparing dinner. Police vehicles surrounded the house. Detective Rodriguez and several officers headed for the entrance. I watched from inside the police vehicle, holding Lucas. The front door opened. David came out. He showed a surprised expression for a moment seeing the officers. But he quickly returned to his usual calm smile. Can I help you, officers? Detective Rodriguez showed him the arrest warrant. David Thompson, you're under arrest. The charges are elder abuse, confinement, fraud, signature forgery, and suspicion of 2 murders. David's face turned pale. He looked around, then spotted the car I was in. Our eyes met. In his eyes were anger and fear. Emma. This is a misunderstanding. Mom has dementia and was violent, so I had no choice. I got out of the car. Detective Rodriguez tried to stop me, but I moved forward anyway. I stood right in front of David. You used me. You used my son. You confined your own mother and tried to kill her. David tried to continue making excuses, but I cut him off. I will do everything in my power to make sure you never see daylight again. An officer handcuffed David. He was still trying to say something, but I no longer had any interest in listening. I turned my back and returned to the car where Lucas was waiting. My son was watching me from the window. He was crying. 6 months passed. David's trial became national news. In the reinvestigation of the past disappearance cases, the body of the first mother-in-law was discovered in the basement of another property David had owned. The investigation into the second mother-in-law was ongoing. The prosecution sought life imprisonment. And on the day of sentencing, David was given 3 life sentences. Without parole. His accomplice Jennifer also received a 15-year sentence for fraud and conspiracy. I witnessed that moment in the courtroom. To the end, David insisted he'd done nothing wrong. But no one believed those words. All of Margaret's assets were restored. The house and land. The embezzled pension was also returned. Most of my savings were also recovered through the seizure of David's assets. But something more precious than money came back to me. After spending 2 months in the hospital, Margaret showed remarkable recovery. The doctors called it a miracle. Her strength returned, and with proper treatment, the progression of her dementia stopped. She regained that gentle smile. Mrs. Chen visited the hospital every day, and the two regained their former friendship. 30 years of bonds couldn't be broken even by those 3 terrible months. On the day Margaret was discharged from the hospital, she gripped my hand and said, "Emma, you and my grandson are my true family. Blood relationships don't matter. You saved me. From now on, I'll protect you." She invited us to her home. Why not live together? At first I hesitated. Could I live in the house where those terrible memories remained? But Margaret said, "I'm going to fill that house with happy memories from now on. I don't want to be controlled by the past." I was moved by her strength. And I made my decision. And now I'm holding new life in my arms. My daughter Sophia, born 3 weeks ago. When Margaret visited the hospital room, she cried. "My true grandchild. How beautiful she is." Lucas was gripping his little sister's tiny hand, smiling happily. "Grandma, we'll always be together. I'll protect her." Mrs. Chen came along too. 4 of us, no, 5 of us, surrounded this small life. This is a real family. Everyone nodded at Mrs. Chen's words. A few days later, we returned to Margaret's house. Everyone's laughter echoes in the living room. Outside the window, the cherry tree in the garden is in full bloom. That garden, which wasn't sold off back then. Now those cherry blossoms are announcing a new spring for us. Holding Sophia, I whispered in my heart, family isn't about blood ties. It's about the people who stay by your side when the world tries to tear you apart. Margaret saved me. And now we're saving each other. This is what family truly means. Lucas is speaking gently to Sophia. Margaret and Mrs. Chen are reminiscing about old times. The peaceful afternoon light gently envelopes the living room. I smiled. After passing through the long darkness, I'd finally arrived. This is our home.